Skyward Sword is coming to the Nintendo Switch, and the game's biggest barrier to, fun has been fixed. It's been quite a week for Nintendo. Mere days after Super Mario 3D World made the jump from the Wii U to the Switch, the company has given the world its first Nintendo Direct in 530 days. Thankfully, Nintendo fans are a patient lot, and haven't been making a fuss about having to wait so long at all. There were a lot of big announcements: Splatoon 3, Fall Guys, a pair of new sword fighters for Smash Bros. Ultimate, but it was the Skyward Sword announcement that made me sit up and pay attention the most. This was partially because I was hoping for Breath of the Wild 2 news, but that's beside the point. Once I got over my initial heart attack at seeing IG Aonuma, I was just happy for any Zelda news at all. Fans had been hoping for a Mario 3D All-Stars type package with 3 Zelda games in one, but come on, you can't expect Nintendo to do the obvious thing. Instead, the big Zelda announcement is this: Skyward Sword, the motion-controlled Wii game from 2011, is getting a nifty HD remaster. This alone would be reason to rejoice, but the Nintendo Direct carefully explained how the game has also been fixed, so that it is now actually playable for the first time. Before I say anything else, why not take a chance on this video and hit that like button right now? Go on, it'll be fun. Anyway, Skyward Sword is a beautiful game. It is one of the most cinematic, story-rich titles that Nintendo has ever produced, and it laid the groundwork for a lot of the gameplay in Breath of the Wild. If it was a movie, it would be perfect. It's basically the closest thing Nintendo will ever make to a Disney movie. Bruce is just totally Gaston, it's perfect. The problem is that only the most patient of the game's player base actually got to experience the game as intended. In an effort to take advantage of the Nintendo Wii's motion controls, the entire game was built around, as I understand it, swinging the Wiimote Plus and nunchuck around at random and hoping that you get lucky. This was famously a very tricky game to develop because of this. There's footage from old E3 presentations that show Nintendo veteran and Mario's dad, Shigeru Miyamoto, struggling to get the game to do what he wants. And with the best will in the world, these problems weren't entirely solved by the time Skyward Sword released onto store shelves. According to the Nintendo Direct, the new HD remaster will offer 2 different control methods. The Switch's Joy-Cons can be used in place of the Wiimote if you want the authentic experience of repeatedly failing to slice a Quadro Baba in half. This alone is no doubt going to be a fantastic improvement over the game's original controls, because Joy-Cons are just a far more advanced form of motion controls. For all its hype, the Wii's motion controls were limited at best, even when upgraded with the Wii Motion Plus system. Joy-Cons have proven to just do this kind of thing better, so that's great for making Skyward Sword actually playable. Even so, not everyone can even use motion controls, no matter how much the technology might advance. Finally, with Skyward Sword HD, Switch players can strip all of that nonsense away and play the game as it was not intended to be played. But for many players, that's going to make all the difference. Perhaps you think I'm being too harsh on motion controls. I've definitely been told by friends that I'm simply wrong for not appreciating the subtle joy of Skyward Sword's control scheme, and to a certain extent that's fair enough, maybe I just don't get it. But there are many players who can't do motion controls. The problem with this whole waving a sword around malarkey is it's absolutely terrible for players who literally can't wave a sword around. That's right, I tricked you. This video is about accessibility. Bear with me on this. Because Zelda games aren't only played by able-bodied people. Take, for example, Terry Garrett, the Zelda fan who beat Ocarina of Time over a 5-year period despite being blind. He slowly worked his way through dungeons, bit by bit, listening out for various sound effects to tell him where he was in the game and what was going on. When we see that level of dedication to video games, we can't help but be impressed. And for gamers like Garrett, who are so eager to put in this much effort to play games, it is only fair that the Legend of Zelda series feature accessibility options to help anyone play. Traditionally, games companies, particularly those developing for console platforms, haven't exactly been great at making games malleable enough to help players with all kinds of needs adjust the game to their convenience. Simple options like full button remapping are important because they help people to adjust controllers around their needs. The ability to increase text size in a game, for example, helps those with poor eyesight to be able to understand what's going on, and subtitles help players who may have hearing difficulties or who are simply not playing the game in their native language. The real pioneers of accessibility on game consoles are over at Microsoft, as they developed a controller that can be completely rebuilt and restructured for those with any forms of needs. They've also allowed players to split buttons between 2 controllers, which is great for accessibility, but also fun if you want to play single-player games in multiplayer by getting one person to move around while the other person jumps or uses the attack button. Pro tip, this is a fantastic way to end a relationship that you want to get out of, as it will inevitably lead to a horrendous argument. Microsoft's accessible controller can now be used on PlayStation and on Switch, but it won't work for games that rely heavily on motion controls. Now, accessibility options are useful for able-bodied gamers as well. I personally played Mass Effect 2 for the first time on a tiny CRT television, and let me tell you, that game was not designed for a TV from 1996. Similarly, I've had to return Steam games and ask for a refund when I've discovered that they don't feature button remapping. Accessibility options help everyone, which is why the news that Skyward Sword HD will feature button controls is so welcome. Because sure, maybe you're going to be fine playing Skyward Sword on Joy-Cons, as the developers intended. That'll probably be a lot less frustrating than playing on a Wiimote anyway. But what if you don't own a Joy-Con? There are over 13 million Nintendo Switch Lites around the world, and this made button controls on Skyward Sword essential. The Switch Lite was, to a certain extent, the death knell of motion controls in Switch games, with the exception of gyroscopic aiming for shooters. I get the sense that when developing the Switch, Nintendo kind of threw everything they had into the device to see what would stick. Extras like HD rumble and motion controls in particular only served to bump up the price of the device, because let's face it, most games do not use them. There were people out there who happily bought a 2DS instead of a 3DS because they didn't want to pay for a dimension they weren't going to use. Yes, that is a Futurama reference. Likewise, there are gamers who aren't going to pay for a Switch when the Switch Lite does the same thing just on a smaller screen and without the unnecessary rumble and Joy-Cons. So in order to make the most of a Skyward Sword HD re-release, and in order to make sure that everyone can actually play the game, Nintendo had to offer an alternative control scheme. They did the same thing with Super Mario Galaxy, letting players tap the screen to collect star bits if they were playing in handheld mode. All of this means that Skyward Sword HD is the most accessible version of the game, which is good for those who might not be able to use motion controls at all, and it's also good for those that just don't want the hassle. It also means, crucially, that the game can also be played while you're riding on the bus. Although, now that I think about it, motion controls on a bus are probably the best way to ensure that everyone around you maintains a healthy distance during a pandemic. Maybe you should play with Joy-Cons on public transport. Or better yet, just stay home. The nice thing about this new control system is that it's optional. If you want to play the game as it was intended, great. If not, you've got another alternative. Ultimately, that's what gaming should be about. Nintendo's not always too hot on letting people do their own thing, so this new control scheme is very welcome. Of course, it remains to be seen how well Skyward Sword actually controls with the new setup. It's all well and good offering a new button-based system, but if it doesn't actually gel with the game, it's only going to cause problems. Anyway, I have been Matthew for DualShockers, thank you very much for watching this far. You should tap that subscribe button and the notification bell for different types of content, as next week we've got some good Persona stuff coming, in celebration of Persona 5 Strikers finally getting released in English. Bye bye!